Happy to be here with you. It's an immense pleasure and honor. And I want to say just one small personal sentence before I start reading my paper. Namely, when Sebastian, at my big surprise, invited me for this occasion, I couldn't resist. And I thought of him all the time while I was writing it. It is in complicity. It's a complicity of sorts that we had, Sebastian and I, for a long time now. So I want to wish him bon voyage in his new life of retirement. I think he will continue being active. He will not be idle in his retirement, but will continue combining his intellectual and imaginative capacities to constantly surprise us with. He will combine these with his peculiar creativity and artistic sensibility as a poet also and as a writer. So I wish you a good retirement, Sebastian. Now about our conference. Is there a post-Western now? How could we not agree to the idea of a new cosmopolitanism for a post-Western world? It was awaited for too long. After at least 500 years of Western domination of the world in various forms and intensities, the time has come not to go back to previous configurations of the world, say of China as the Middle Kingdom she once was, but to move on together, critically of course, and beyond any centrism, not only beyond Western-centrism. But it is not sure that we can easily attain this aim. The exhaustion of the so far dominant world, dominant in knowledge and politically, that model is visible, the exhaustion of that model. However, the request to step into a post-Western world and in the present, in a now, is paradoxical to my understanding, because after we have been through our time's globalization, which has now come to an end, fortunately, the West has infiltrated the rest to various degrees, and others have penetrated in return in all fields. We are now a shared tangle. We shall never reach a definitive elsewhere from which moving on together could be pursued, because there is no credible elsewhere. There isn't a credible elsewhere given in advance, that is what I mean. But how can we make up for this non-symmetricality between the West and the rest? The key concepts here in my essay are together, doing it together, sharing, interdependence, inclusiveness, while sovereignty has been compromised by a system of recognized interdependence. We need to develop new ways of thinking. So the project is epistemological besides being political. And this will be easier when we decenter ourselves. There is a difficulty of thinking outside boxes. From Western modernity on, there has been continuity for the West and interruption for non-European cultures, for the rest. for non-European cultures, histories, languages, for which indeed there is supposed to be only discontinuity with their own antiquity. Their own past counts as pre-modern or traditional, and thus as belated compared to the universalized modernity. This is because Western modernity itself is normative and has been forcefully universalized. The norm of modernity and the dignity of the modern political has been spread through Western idioms and politics, and the political was denied to non-Western countries, whether colonized or not. Modernity has been one of the great disjunctions that froze some norms in history, produced thresholds and barriers, making them become patterns. From that time on, Western modernity has constructed an unbroken etymological origin for its own concepts and episteme as universal. That universality is fictional, but fiction has worked. The subject as an autonomous figure of modernity, functioning through exception and exclusion, is mirrored in complementary brackets national state sovereignty. It refers to the hegemonically dominant model, although alternative patterns have not altogether disappeared. Collective action and forms of association, the sharing and federation of knowledge, transcend individual subjectivity in a completely new way. In what we are globally today, while differences cannot be precisely located, and they traverse us all, even as globalization shrinks. Some 30 or more years ago, when I faced the partition of my and disappearance of the country I was born and raised in, Yugoslavia, I realized how tremendous that threshold was, not only for all the concerned, but also as a conditioning element in broader history. It was part of a global scene. Indeed, that partition of a small country soon appeared to be an extreme case of what I called the 1989 years in the plural, symbolized in Europe also by the fall of the Berlin Wall that year. It was part of an important world-changing event, the so-called end of the Cold War. But in East and Southeast Asia, the Cold War seemed somehow temporarily suspended, and it's another history. Yet the end of the then Cold War, mainly in Europe, which then grew into new wars in Central, but now also in Eastern Europe, that remains a significant landmark. With a little distancing, one could also grasp the meaning of such a brink or edge or limit in a wider circle of events, from personal to historic to international. But it was sufficient to have one glance at Asia, and in particular at Taiwan and China, to see that the same process didn't follow the same pattern in East and Southeast Asia as in Europe, although it is seen as a universal process, and in a way it is a universal process. Thinking embedded in language is the main resource humans have. In many cases, it is also the only resource one has. I have studied in a book on translation the impact of the end of the Cold War on our political language. And I identified an important swing time when an old vocabulary is emptied and exhausted while a new one is in need of building or rebuilding, not only after the colonial period, but also after the years 1989. It also appeared that these transformations in the use of language at swing time also correspond partly to regionalization of epistemologies and meaningful political languages used. Roughly, the Cold War and then the end of the Cold War coincided not only with geographical but also with political divisions east-west, also called in that sense at that time socialism versus capitalism. They were projected in Europe on its Cold War division, easiest seen in Germany. And here I'd like to open a parenthesis for the view of Jae-Hyun Lim in Seoul. In his excellent book, to my understanding of, the book is called Global East, which admits shifting viewpoints and confuses completely ossified binary schemes, especially East-West and socialism versus capitalism, and so on. The pattern in its turn has been, perhaps only apparently, upset, I wouldn't say invalidated, by the Russian war on Ukraine that dawned in 2022, just after Jae-Hyun Lim's book was published. So he was one war too late, and I was several wars too late. A few decades earlier, an Indian philosopher, Kalidas Bhattacharya, too, like Jae-Hyun Lim recently, had written about shifting points of view. If I may extend Jae-Hyun's intention a little. Namely, Kalidas Bhattacharya's book, Alternative Standpoints in Philosophy, considers that philosophy tolerates undecidable alternatives and divergent ideas or parallel systems and swinging positions. This is unbearable to most Western philosophers. Bhattacharya was influenced by Buddhist relativism and by the Syadvada theory. Syadvada means the theory of maybe. And it is a Jainist theory. Jainism is like Buddhism, an old descendant school of philosophy, but also of religion, descendant versus dominating and domineering Brahmanism, which is the peculiar problem of India. Kalidas Bhattacharya's theory was influenced by these, by Jainism and Buddhism, as well as by Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, another Bhattacharya who was his father, a famous philosopher in India. His father was interested in seeing the subject not as a dominant sovereign figure, but as freedom itself. Freedom would then not be an external object to be obtained, but it would be this inner region in which the subject is freed even from itself in order to be with others. This point of being with others I find very important. If the other is in us in reciprocity, the subject exists in its capacity as freedom, impersonal, but also transpersonal. Is not all identity trans-individual? According to French philosopher Etienne Balibar, identity is both individual and collective, as well as ambivalent. It is also a fiction constructed on exclusion, or I would say primarily on an idea of opposition. It is also transpersonal, and it is an allegation. Identity is an allegation which condemns you for being what you are told to be. In such cases of reciprocity, and trans-individuality, we avoid strict binaries, and we need to avoid them. The binary division of the word had a lot to do with previous historic thresholds, such as, in particular, colonialism. In its turn, a binary order of we against them. Binary thinking is only the first manifestation of a larger, generally failing and exhausted epistemology before we even think of the technologies thereof and of the cognitive mechanisms. Because binaries come first to our mind. The modern form of that split in Europe, well, it goes from Kant on, if you want, and this is what Sebastian mentioned in his introduction, but the 20th century form of it was theorized by Carl Schmitt, Nazi jurist and philosopher, but comparable dualisms and value binaries exist and have existed in all cultures, even in cultures that prevalently preach something else, right? For example, you have a binarism in Brahmanism, you have them in Buddhism too, you have schools of binaries, but then they are critiqued and overcome and so on. So in much of ancient Indian philosophies, it is better, especially in Buddhism, it is considered better to avoid binary logics. This is also the basis of the general misunderstanding between ancient Indian philosophies and modern Western ones, European ones. But I must skip that issue here. But on the side of Brahmanism, see Advaita philosophy, Dvaita philosophy, the dualism, which comes as a critique of Advaita, of non-binary philosophy. So the dualism teaching in Brahmanism, which belongs to the school of Vedanta, in ancient Indian Orthodox philosophies, belongs to Indian scholastics. The common source of the whole of Vedanta, which is the main Brahmanistic school, irrespective of its faction, is the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra, where you can find both. You can find Dvaita, dualism, and Advaita, non-dualism. I will come to the issue of the unthought of, especially as the unthinkable, the so-called unthinkables of power, that materialize as an epistemic blackout, especially but not exclusively in gender and other inequalities. They are not really unthinkable, the unthought of, right? The unthought of are not really unthinkable, but they are prohibited of being thought. We must now learn from the unknown, how to overcome this situation without ready-made guidelines, while building an inclusive epistemology. From early Buddhism, we can think of avidya. The term means ignorance in Sanskrit, avidya, and apply it now as a threshold between two epistemological eras, that of the inveterate neoliberalism of roughly the 20th century versus its counterattack and the virilist nationalist backlash against institutionalized socialism. The backlash is also against, not only against socialism, but against post-socialism and wild capitalism too, while all of it is now governed by the digital dimension, which comes as a catastrophe of the unthought. The unthought is political. A later view on the restructuring of political world configurations helps understanding it. Giving up frozen binaries will help. One such binary contraption of thinking is the dichotomy of theory and practice, for example. We are still awaiting the institution of post-binaries, non-linear approaches to knowledge. In ancient Indian philosophies, it is practice called yoga in Sanskrit. Yoga means practice, doesn't mean anything else. It is yoga that comes first, practice, and then theory. Why? Because it is practice that measures theory, or that legitimates it or delegitimates it. This is misunderstood in the West to the extent that yoga practice is reduced to popular gymnastics, right? Physical exercise, separated from the teaching it governs in Indian knowledge systems, where disciplines are different than in the West. And each discipline, each knowledge school has its own yoga, and the yogas are different. Paradoxically, we must agree that modern India too belongs to the West in many ways. So West bashing alone will not do in view of overcoming the contradiction. Neither will Indian spirituality do. Indian spirituality, quote unquote. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, the latter being the European name for the 1989 threshold, which meant many different things in Asia, it may have seemed for a while that we had attained a unipolar world, since the binary socialism versus capitalism, or East-West, was discontinued, at least in popular culture, but also at the level of international politics. The world appeared to be united under the banner of the then only visible superpower, the USA, while the Soviet Union had disappeared together with an idea of socialism. And China was to contend that role a few decades later. Many new factors of the new transition appeared later. Overnight, for the understanding of the West, overnight China emerged as a developed superpower, and the West was surprised. While the USA, as well as Europe, started showing signs of decay, which they still have difficulties recognizing. After the world had been liberated from the big geopolitical binary, the Cold War, we woke up lost in translation. Lost in translation for all of us, meaning lacking a common language to be able to think together with precision. The epistemic priority befalling to the practical aspect, its impact on our reality, appeared as a troubling puzzle. And we are still, to a great extent, in that puzzle, and this is why this conference is very timely and its topic is very timely. We have reached reciprocally incomplete but complementary and diversified transversality, indeed intersectionality of knowledges of different origin, in total popular and media confusion. The question is how to instill and accompany this non-comprehended dynamics further so as to attain a new cosmopolitanism. It will be beyond a present. We have a present in the title of the conference, but I think it will be beyond a present as we knew it, towards a shared future, let alone a now, which is too small, too limited. You know, in Indian philosophy, in Buddhist ancient philosophy, there is a theory of Kshanikavada, which means the theory of the moment, now. And the moment can never be caught, can never be identified because of the constant flow. So the world system having collapsed, because the world system as we knew it has collapsed, as my generation knew it has collapsed, we need to imagine and fabricate a new common arrangement based on new ways of thinking, and but at the same time we are troubled by a non-mastered artificial intelligence and digital dimension, which happens at the same time. The challenge is tremendous to develop the instruments as well as the new configuration with contents at the same time, which means learning while doing, which includes inevitable mistakes. And we must count on these inevitable mistakes. We don't yet know which ones they will be. We are heading, as always, at comparable turning points, because this is a turning point, this is a threshold in history, towards the unknown. And since we are here trying to reflect on the manner and instruments of the thinking process in this new situation in 2025, we find that we have to build up these instruments and procedures at the very same time as we reconstruct our new world materially, organizationally, etc. It is not only that some concepts we have used so far have lost their correspondence to the material world. In a general process of desemanticization, they have regularly also changed the meanings in language. Many of the terms we used to have definitely become non-operational today, redundant and sometimes useless in a new context. It's all also about language and translation. And in this situation of lack of appropriate translation, and by the way, the difficulty is that translation is never appropriate, but at least nearer to the original, if possible. In this situation, we actually don't have guidelines. And we have also situations where the words mean exactly the opposite, especially in politics, in media language. The words mean exactly the opposite from what they used to mean before, right? This is completely confusing. States, state sovereignty, institutions, oppositions, parties, democracies, the word system, international relations, state sovereignty, the very contents and meanings of nations within the ruins of the classical modern state system of Western origin we are in will be reshuffled, but we do not yet quite see how, or we work on understanding how. Some will say, after the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze, that this is happening through molecular and not molar movements and resistance. Maybe. In any case, I'm convinced that a future world will not be monolithic in contents, shapes, or epistemic orientations, which complicates the picture, and we shall not have a blueprint of what is truth. We could consider the Buddhist Chaturkoti logic, the four-cornered logic of ancient Buddhism. They have a formula. Or the Jaina seven-thronged maybe logic, the logic with seven elements, seven propositions, as in Indian Jainist logic, which involve the systematic examination of each of the four or the seven possible propositions. Now I shall try to spell out these propositions. The Buddhist Chaturkoti formula of understanding of the process of concluding four propositions. The first one is P, P for proposition, P, which means there is being. 2, not P, which means there is no being. 3, P and not P. This is becoming confusing. P and not B. There is being and there is not being. And 4, not P or not P, which means there is neither being nor not being. The previous one, there is being and not being. Now the last proposition is there is neither being nor not being. These are the 4 possibilities we have. One would think that the 7-cornered Syadvada, maybe logic of the Jainas, is an extension of or a derivative from Buddhism, but it could historically be exactly the opposite, since Jainism is older, is somewhat older than Buddhism, but it could be both. So the latter, the 7-cornered logic in Jainism, is the non-dualistic, non-dogmatic, and not limiting epistemological option, which runs like this in our post-Western now. So I'm trying to translate it in our post-Western now. 1, maybe it is Western. 2, maybe it is not Western. 3, maybe it is both Western and not Western. 4, maybe it is unspeakable. Now this is new and important. 4, maybe it is unspeakable. Maybe it can't be put into language. 5, maybe it is Western but is unspeakable. 6, Maybe it is not Western, but is unspeakable. And 7, the last proposition, maybe it is both Western and non-Western, as well as unspeakable. This is remarkable. I think that this Jaina formula is admirable. Our future should never again rely on the restrictive binary logics that brought us here. This is what these formulas say. It is an epistemological issue. The Syadvada, or the maybe logics of the Jaina, as an extension of the Chaturkoti, fourth-ranged logic of the old Buddhists, looks like hopeless and confusing relativism. But I would say it is not. At least it is not confusing. Maybe it is relativism. Why? Its point is another one. The point is that it is actually this 7 steps process of thinking is actually founded on the principle of ahimsa, non-violence, the principle of non-violence, ahimsa, non-violence, and which means also tolerance of all forms of life, transferred to the area of knowledge, from ethics to knowledge, right? If there is no unity between ethics and knowledge, it will not work. We must have ethics at our service too. It is important to know that the basic division here is that with the Jainas, but I suggest we adopt it. It is the basic division is between life, the living, and what is not life, what is not born. Of course, this becomes too detailed and complicated, so for a while I shall skip one part. Binaries are age-old and ubiquitous, dispersed yet challenged as a mechanism, but also as symmetries, when indeed they distribute power unequally, much in a mechanical way that doesn't require thinking. In such cases, we denounce them as false symmetries used by power and hegemonic interests. Possibly, we may at this point, in a positive version of post-human, if not transhuman demeanor, procure and open self-critique. But you still have to have unity between ethics and cognition. Such self-critique now happens in the area of language, meaning, references, symbolism, translation, epistemology in general, and we need to study it, therefore, also in language, but also in a way it means that if we do it at the level of knowledge and thinking, and by the way, knowledge and thinking, knowing and thinking and language are the same thing, right? They come together. If we do it at the level of language, we are in a circular thing, in the closed box of language. So if we want to reach out, we need to connect to other dimensions, and I mentioned the ethical one, which is also political, as one of these. Quite beyond the spell of binary life and non-life forms, thinking patterns and limited self-critique, passing beyond the performative link of object naming. Object naming, meaning, translation, power, hegemony, sovereignty, subjectivity or the engaged and interested agency. We now have, beyond this spell, we now have the possibility of passing from theoretical ethics to engaged political materiality and action, but also the opposite, building ethics and political projects on materiality. This happens or can happen because, as with any yoga, right, any practice in the ancient Indian sense, the very opposition of theory and practice, another Western limited dualism, loses importance, since it is necessarily practice, yoga, that checks it and comes first. It controls, allows, confirms thinking. And we could say, so much the worse for theory. This is exactly the opposite of what happens in much of, but not only Western theory first attitudes and power in knowledge positions, which say so much the worse for practice, right? In most failed political projects around the world, including in global Easts, I'm referring again to Jae-Hyun Lim's book, it is generally practice that is dismissed. This is abstractly supposed to be correct, but it couldn't be a solution to my mind. We must now turn this formula upside down for the new cosmopolitical project that will include other knowledges too. I was talking about binarisms. Now there is a frightening connection between binarism or dualisms and war. Not imposing our values, our criteria, our norms, our language, or knowledge constructions, our own naming of others or their objects, projects, and engagements is at the same time both an epistemic and an ethical endeavor, as well as clearly therefore also a political enterprise, which will now have to include the objectal dimension, not only the subjective subjectal dimension, the objectal dimension, the relatively new digital and artificial intelligence dimension, about which I can't say much, as well as thinking, subjectal thinking, subject things, about the exhaustion and extinction of nature, life, and planet by our doing. Yet, this, at least partly, cannot be evaluated or measured retrospectively at all, because it is impossible to assess through merely an ethical disposition the reciprocal merging and traversing of cultural, language, and knowledge elements towards an oncoming new cosmopolitics. We must take into account what has already happened, but no one, whether from the West or the East, can assess that which has by now become a shared heritage, and in which percentages, although in different proportions, because the Western option has modified us all, has modified the people both East and West. This is a process that cannot be totally mastered, although we may have good intentions in overcoming it. We certainly can and must interpret, translate, analyze, and critique the arrogant and self-sufficient would-be sovereign power input by the West into the non-West, as well as its disastrous historic consequences. But here we are curtailed again to a dualist construction that can never hold all the possibilities. We can't accept that either. We can't accept the division, the West and the rest. We have to work through it. And by the way, yes, when I said that there is an arrogant, self-sufficient, would-be sovereign subject or element, in Sanskrit we say Swayambhu. Swayambhu is, so you see other cultures have it also. Swayambhu is that which is produced by itself, which has no origin in the other, right? It's good to know that each culture has been able to think about this. I have another Buddhist theory, Buddhist formula that I shall skip. Now, binary logics are impeding thinking. Binary logics embezzle, showing one thing but saying another. They purposely confuse, mystify, and distort the reasoning process. They are at the service of power, domination, and associate with pretended universality. We are aiming at post-binary thinking now. The general inability not to think through a binary pattern is astonishing. The Aristotelian formula tertium non datur, which means there is no third element, challenges the mere possibility of independent thinking. And it was a rule, a basic rule in Western thinking, in European philosophies. There is no third option. There are no other positions. So the other positions, the third element, is hidden by the formula. So we shall reject that formula too. Let me see what I can shorten. About war, I have not finished. The subject, the agency. Yes, I could develop a gentle critique here, but taking into account whatever I have said so far, so there is no big loss if I finish now. Just let me recapitulate a bit. That it is true that the West did assume and still holds in its imaginary positions of cognitive domination and power without coverage, without justification, even as it is being divested of that power. And we now have a great opportunity to reach beyond with a corresponding hazard. We need to accept that corresponding hazard. I shall stop here because my time is finished, but as usual I have too long a paper too long.
Professor Iveković, that's a wonderful, wonderful talk, very stimulating, very enriching. She has already touched upon many issues, and her personal and intellectual journey actually has taken her across much of the globe. So she's the right person, to talk about the now and cosmopolitan. Her talk is not just about future thinking. By drawing on Buddhist philosophy, non-Western Oriental philosophy, she tried to expand it on the idea of now as a kind of continuous moment, flow of time, and move it forward to the future. And that cosmos thinking, cosmopolitan, new cosmopolitan, cosmos thinking that really draw upon really relationality, interdependency, and intimacy between human and modern human beings. That is really, really wonderful. So we still have some time for Q&A. The floor is open. I would like to invite all of you to either comment or raise your question to enter into dialogue with Professor Iveković. speech. It's once in a lifetime experience, as I say. So the floor is open. We are going to pick up a few questions. So when you raise your hand, and would you please also identify yourself?
Diamond, thank you for your talk. I want to ask a question about the truth. If we're going to talk about eliminating dualism, and trying to think in a non-binary way, the Semitic religions, both Judeo-Christian and Islamic, had claims on exclusive truth. They had one God, and that was the true God. And this puts everything else into relative insignificance. Whereas in Asia, the religions were less exclusive. They were often multiple God, whether Hinduism or Jainism or animist. So there's maybe a greater practice of thinking, accepting contradictions, non-binaryism, of accepting that two sides can be equally true, that our minds can accept contradictions and non-binaryism, whereas those three Western Semitic religions completely rejected that possibility.
Jiaxing Xu from Institute of Law, Academia Sinica. The first question is, do you think it's helpful to distinguish between post-Western and some kind of maybe post-postmodern? Because I think modernity, in a way, hasn't impacted on the world, and the impact probably is not totally reversible. So to what extent can we distinguish what is Western and what is modern? And the second question is, which West are we going to say goodbye to? Is it the West, during the nation-state building era, or the postmodern, liquid modernity era? Which West are we going to say post to? And in choosing which West to say goodbye to, we're also pretty much charting our path, which way, going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I have two excellent questions. The question about truth. I'm not so much in religion. I am more in philosophy, or in that part of religion that is thinking. So I can say that the examples that you gave, that in Asia there is more tolerance between, and I gave you some examples. I have some more of philosophers who have thought about these issues. It goes very much in the direction of what you said. But let me say that I think that some countries in Asia, for example, India, that I know best, it is this incredible assemblage of people of all sorts of religion living together, and in peacetime they are very cooperative, and it's a good coexistence. It usually lasts as long as there is peace. As soon as there is as soon as there is a conflict, it doesn't work anymore. Plus, they have their own divisions, which then interfere, And truth is a thing that you can decide only on each occasion. There is no such thing as a general truth for humans. Maybe if there were some a higher instance that thinks about it, we could talk about it. I'm sorry I can't extend because my time is lost, but thank you for your question, which was excellent on how can we decide which West to say goodbye to. Well, this is the whole difficulty. I think that you actually resumed my talk in very good wording, so I would like to use some of your ideas. The difficulty is that we have this problem. We don't have nobody will tell us which one to pick, which part of the West to pick, and we may make big mistakes again. We have been making mistakes all through history, and we shall make many more, and it will be more difficult than ever because there is no end to it, and we can provide violence on all levels and on more levels than before. So I'm not a very big optimist about the future of humanity, but that is another. Thank you for your questions that were much better than my answers. I would need more time.
Well, thank you so much. This is not only future thinking, but also cosmic oriented. And I hope you have already created a bond among all of us and try to sort of allocate a self free of a subject free of self to be with others. So let's give Professor Rada a big round of applause. Thank you so much.